So let's move on to our next lesson, which has to do with the study of attitudes. Surprisingly, at least for me, the study of attitudes, the interest in attitudes have been well explored in social psychology. There's a lot of interest in the study of attitudes. And it's surprising to me because I personally would have thought that other topics like conformity, like groups, would have been more of an interest, but apparently there's a lot of research behind attitudes. Well, attitudes is a strong, you can say, evaluation and a strong perception that you have on a topic. So you may have a strong attitude toward K-pop. You're a huge, passionate fan of K-pop. That's a strong attitude that you have. Maybe you have a strong negative attitude against reggaeton music. You hate reggaeton, and every time that you hear it, it evokes some odd, this kind of annoying feelings in you. That's an attitude. In the political climate, for example, that we live, there can be very strong attitudes on a presidential candidate. There can be a strong attitude toward a political party. So those are all attitudes. And the study of attitudes bring out some very interesting phenomena, and that's what we want to discuss in this video. So first thing is, most basic thing to understand about attitudes is that attitudes may be conditioned. Because where does attitudes come from? As a human being, you're not born with a set of attitudes. You don't. You learn those through the environment. So attitudes may be a result of conditioning. If you're not familiar with the concept of conditioning, really quick to summarize it, comes from the lessons of behaviorism and tells you that the environment aids to teach you something. Like the environment teaches you something. It can be happening sort of accidentally, which is classical conditioning. It could have happened on purpose, and that would have been more like operant conditioning. Or it could have happened because you watched someone, and that would be more like modeling, like social learning. So for example, say if you had a rough experience on a flight, perhaps now you have kind of a iffy negative sensation toward trips that have to take you on a long flight. So that attitude was classically conditioned. You were taught about that from the environment, and now you have a strong attitude for that. Operant conditioning could also serve. So for example, if you were raised in a house that valued religion, perhaps you now have strong, maybe it could be a positive attitude towards religion, and that's because it was taught to you, and that's operant conditioning. Modeling is not specifically taught to you, but you learn by watching. Say that perhaps you grew up in a house where someone was abusing alcohol, and it caused such a visceral negative reaction in you that now you decided that you no longer want to taste beer in your life, and that might have been a result of modeling because social learning, you saw something, and what you saw led to an attitude. So that's how attitudes tend to be, created in us. For some of those attitudes we may be aware, to some of those we may have thought of, learned by experience. But one of the main lessons that we have on attitudes is coming from the theory of planned behavior. And for this it brings us to a classic study in the field. So Richard Lapierre very famously took a young Chinese couple on a road trip. In the years when he conducted this study, there was a lot of, and it was kind of accepted in California, there was a lot of negative attitudes. You can almost call it prejudice towards Asian ancestry folks of Asian ancestry because of the World War and political climate that was going on that was very tense with Asia at that time. So the story of the study is that Richard Lapierre took this young couple and they went on a road trip and they stopped by something like 250, 260 establishments to see if they would be served. Only one restaurant said no. They come back from the road trip, and then Lapierre wrote letters to all of those establishments asking them if he were to stop by with a young Chinese couple, would they serve them? About 90% of the restaurants said no. The rest of them said, I'll sleep in it. Despite the restaurants saying no, when they stopped there, they actually they were given the service. Only one place refused it. So if the owners or the workers of the restaurant had such an attitude, why still would they act against it? So that's where the theory of planned behavior comes. Having an attitude is not enough to lead to a behavior. There's two other factors that must play a role, which are the subjective norms and the perceived control behaviorally that a person would have. So let me put up an example here. Say that I have a very strong attitude and I want to join like a bike club, a motorcycle club, you know. I'm very much passionate about motorcycles and I want to join a motorcycle club. I want to be on the streets, you know, riding with my brothers and sisters. I want to be on a long road trip. I want to do all those things. Would I actually join if I have such a strong positive attitude towards it? Well, then you got to take the two other factors. Subjective norms. Subjective norms are kind of like social rules that exist that would say yes or no. So, for example, I may start to think, well, if I were, would I be accepted? Would the motorcycle club accept me? Would I be comfortable in such a long crowd at the time of COVID? Would I feel like by my age I'd be taken in by a group that in my perception might only be for older people? You know, those kind of things are the subjective norms. And of course, norms imply that those are like standards, but subjective means that they don't have to be general. They would be in my mind, in the mind of the person that is having an attitude about it. Perceived behavioral control now refers to, well, do I feel like I could do it? So it's not enough for me to think that society would accept it. It's also important for me to think if I believe that I could do it. Would I have enough money to afford a motorcycle? Would I believe that I would have enough time to hang out with those folks? Those are perceived behavioral control, and that's more of me. So would I feel like I can do that? If you have all three factors in line, it's most likely going to lead to the behavior. So I have a strong attitude toward one thing. Would I believe the social norm, the social rules, support it? And would I feel like I have the means, and would I feel like I have enough in me to go ahead and do it, then I'll do it. Put up here super quick, sensitive example, but in El Paso in 2019, we had an incident where a mass shooter came out to a Walmart, and in what appeared to be a racially charged incident, a lot of people died. In the mind of this person, apparently there was a strong, hostile, negative attitude toward Hispanics. But he's not the only one. There's a lot of other people like him that may have those negative, hostile attitudes towards a specific race or a specific ethnic group. So what makes him different that he would go on to do this compared to other people that wouldn't dare to never do anything like that? Well, the subjective norms would have allowed for it. Perhaps he felt like he had enough social power. Perhaps he believed that he had support from others. Perhaps he thought that he was going to be sending a strong message that other people will follow. And then the perceived behavioral control, he had access to a gun. He had access to the means because he drove like 8 hours to come to El Paso. So he had the car to drive. You know, those are other factors that if you align them, it's more likely that the attitude is going to lead to the behavior. Now, on the other hand, sometimes it doesn't have to be that attitudes lead to actions. It can also be the other way around. Actions may lead to attitudes. And in here, there's three minor theories that seem to be popular to explain a little bit of how this would happen. The first one being impression management. So with impression management, if I find myself doing an action, I may try to consciously create an explanation for why I'm doing it. So the example that is on the slides is about a woman that is smoking. So she's smoking and she catches herself smoking in the act, and she tries to find a way to manage the impression to say, well, I look cool smoking. So for the action that I'm doing, I try to find an explanation, I try to find a reasoning, so then I just feel like I belong here. especially with kind of actions that you're not too too conscious of why you're doing it. You try to find a way to explain it, and that goes like very closely aligned to what is then cognitive dissonance, which talked in the previous lesson. Especially when you find yourself doing an action that goes against your attitude, remember that's cognitive dissonance. At that point, you may try to find a way to rationalize. So if I am an advocate against smoking, but I catch myself smoking, I'm going to try to find a way to rationalize to not make me feel bad. And especially if it's an ongoing thing, I'm going to have to rationalize like crazy to feel comfortable with it. So I'm smoking even though I'm an advocate against smoking, but if I catch myself in the act, I'm going to say, well, one is not so bad. Or, well, our current pandemic is so harsh that I need to find a way to relax. And this is my relaxed state of mind. And you try to find ways and excuses to make yourself feel better about it. That's cognitive dissonance. The action then leads to an attitude. However, the one that I found most fascinating though is self-perception theory, because it's very odd how sometimes we are on a constant, ongoing, automatic mindset that we don't realize how we start acting in ways that are not what we want or what is best for us. According to self-perception theory, a person may engage in an act for such a long time, and if the person is questioned or the person is, trying to understand why the person does it, the person may just look at the action and say, well, if I'm doing it, then I guess I enjoy it. If you ask a person that has been working 40 years in the same place without second thoughts about it, do you like it? It can be surprising how often you may encounter a person thinking or saying something on the lines of, well, I've been doing it for 40 years, so I guess I like it. Or someone that has been dating the same person for 6 years. You may end up saying, man, you've been in a relationship for 6 years, so I guess you love this person. And then you're like, we've been dating for 6 years, so yeah, it's kind of love. Sometimes the actions that we take lead to attitudes that we end up having.